Okay. All right. Thanks, Gary. Yes. Welcome to the second webinar for the Code-A-Thon. In this one's a little bit different from the last one, and the agenda for today's meeting is that I'll give a brief introduction to the API and go through in a little bit of detail the API documentation, because as you're learning to use any web service API, you have to be able to read the documentation. And then I'll introduce you to a tool that I developed that will be able to provide you with better access or quicker access to some of the different API calls and the docset tool that I've created. And then we'll spend some time using the API inspector tool. It's another new tool that I developed a couple of weeks ago to really help you to dig down and understand the responses that you get back from the API. Then I'll point you to the video series, and like the video series on the external applications, I basically go through from beginning to end on the API, understanding the responses that you get back, and showing you how you can use the API inspector tool as a starter set for developing your own applications. And in the video series, I take you through an example of building an application using the API. So you might want to, if you haven't looked at those, to make sure that you go through those videos. And then I'll finish off by just pointing you to some useful programming resources that I came across over the last year. And then I'll just talk a little bit about the Code-A-Thon accounts that are created now, waiting for that information to be sent to you that are registered. And then we'll open it up to question and answer. So having said that, let me just exit PowerPoint here and bring up the API, Web Services API guide. And this guide, by the way, is online on FCOL right now, or on FirstClass. And there's my long address to it. But if you just, I think if you just went API docs after firstclass.com, I have a redirect that, nope, docs with an S, sorry. I think I have a redirect that actually takes you right to there. So just firstclass.com/API docs will take you to the docs. And that's the most recent one from the most recent release. Now, what you have to also understand is that you have those docs available to you. So when you install FirstClass Web Services and you're in your FirstClass Web Services folder, inside there is a link or an alias to the FCWS, the Web Services folder. If you've installed locally, inside there you'll see a folder that's called Docs. And if I were to launch this Web Services API HTML guide, you'd see it's exactly what you see that's on our website. So that will correspond to the version that you have installed, which hopefully is the latest release version, which is what we have here on firstclass.com. So just a little bit about the architecture of how Web Services works so that you understand. Web Services is basically a Python interpreter for FirstClass protocol. So when you submit requests from your web browser or from some other client to get information from the FirstClass server, you're making the GET or POST requests to the FirstClass server, the web services, that then translates into a FirstClass protocol, the request to the FirstClass server. And the FirstClass server then responds back, and the web services then gives a response back to you as a JSON response so that you can then parse that data and present it to your users any way that you want. And on that web services installation, you've got some JavaScript, HTML, and Python code that does all that work for you. So all you really have to know in making requests is how to format those requests to either get information or to post to update information on the server. So you can read through this and take a look at what the structure of the FirstClass Web Services is. I'm not going to, you can read just as well as I can, but I want to just spend a little bit of time about the difference between GET and POST requests to the server. And then we'll go through some real examples. So hopefully, if this is a bit confusing at the beginning, by the end it'll start to make sense, and then if you want to, you can review the webinar after the fact. So you've got, as I said, two different types of requests. But first thing that I have to make absolutely clear to you is that only authenticated users can access the API. There are no requests that you can make to the API unless you're authenticated. So the first thing that you're going to have to do is make sure that you log in as a user to get information or to update information on the server. And you can only do what that user is able to do. So if a user does not have the ability to open a conference or a community using the desktop or the web services client, he won't be able to do that using the API either. So authentication is the first step. And then once you've authenticated and you're logged into the server, then what you can do is you can make requests to the server. And typical ones would be opening objects. And the first thing that you would do is you'd send a request to the server using FCP and then opening the desktop. And then every object on the server has a web ID, and we'll get to that in just a second. So you can drill down by just, adding on the different web IDs to open the containers and then dealing with the response that comes back from the server. So we've got all sorts of different GET requests. You can open containers, and those are strictly by web ID. But you can also, we have a special syntax where we can open by a index or by special typed folder. And as I said, I'll go through examples of these in just a minute. But we list for you here in the documentation the special number for the different containers. So I can open the typed folder, which is number 1, which would be the mailbox. Or if you want to open the calendar directly, it's 21. So you don't have to know the path to that particular special object. You can open it specifically by its type number. Or if it's not a container, perhaps it's your preferences or your chat or system info or search. Well, then that's a known object, and each known object has its own ID. Calendars, people may want to build applications that build specific little tools that present calendars in different ways. Well, there's all sorts of information in the API for specifying how I can get future tasks or what the format is for different objects and different flags, and that's all detailed here in the documentation. And I've got some code examples that I'll share with you that you can see how I've done it, and then you might be able to use that in your own applications. So lots of information here on the calendar because it's probably the most complicated object that we have on the FirstClass server. You also have access to directory information, so you'll be able to find out who's online, get images that are on the server, do all sorts of things through GET requests. And that's just retrieving information from the server. You're not doing any updating. You're just retrieving and getting that information. If you want to update information, however, that is what is called a post request. And post requests require that you send additional information. And the first one that we'll come across that's really a post request is logging in. Because when you log in, you have to send your credentials, and you have to encode those credentials, I would hope, in a base64 encoded SHA-512 digest. And I provide all those libraries for you and the examples in the inspector tool. So we'll go through that in just a second. So once you're logged in, then what you can do is you can start to create objects. So for example, you could create conferences, communities, you can create messages and documents, you can send messages. If you have the message ID, you can unsend it, you can reply to messages. You can basically build your own FirstClass client using the API because the FirstClass client uses the API. The web services client uses the API. And you can move objects around, you can delete objects, and as I said, I have code examples that we'll get to just at the end that you can pick apart to see how I've done each of these different things as well. So it's pretty powerful. In the documentation itself, we've got all sorts of information to help you to know which fields to use, what ID numbers to use if you're going to be updating things and setting form fields and doing all sorts of things. But I think probably it's best to dig down and get into some examples. Before I do that, however, I just have to make sure that you understand that if you are using a browser-based tool to build your applications, then we can't use posts as you might think, and that's because of the server's cross-domain or same domain policies. Requests can't successfully retrieve data from a different domain, a subdomain, or protocol. So that means that any request to the API from a web browser application from a different domain or subdomain will be denied access or denied the request to the FirstClass server. So to overcome that, the API provides what's called a JSON-P mechanism. And that enables the data to be submitted or retrieved as part of a script request as a GET. And that doesn't fall under the same origin policy. So this doesn't apply to applications accessing the FirstClass web server API unless they are browser-based applications. Since the same domain, same origin policy is a browser-enforced policy. So the documentation has said that it's all here, but what I've done is I've taken the code that's in all these little syntax snippets, and I've built an application that's called, that's online, and it's just the firstclass.com API docset. And in this case, what I've done is I've categorized by gets and posts, and I can select a category. So for example, if I want to open a container, what's the syntax for opening a container? What kind of container? Well, let me open my desktop. And I can see here that I've got this. Once I've logged in, I just have to send this request to the server. And then one of the parameters is reply as JSON, so that the information coming back to me will be JSON data. And we'll get to that, as I said, in just a second. What if I wanted to, instead of opening a container, opening a particular typed folder that might be my mailbox? Well, here's the syntax, and it's typed folder equals 1. Well, what if I wanted to add and just get my unread items? Well, here I've added these flags taken directly from the documentation. So I broke down all of the gets into the different categories. So if I wanted my profile, get my profile, there would be the command that I'd have to use. So if I need to update information, that's a post, so I'll go to my post category, and, well, if I wanted to send a pulse request or update my pulse status, there's the information that I have to send. We'll get to these different things here as I get to an example in just a second, but basically in a post, it's really a get, and we just format our request as a JSON string and ask it to reply as JSON, and it comes back as a JSON-P script injection that we can deal with in our code. So having said that, what I want to do is take you through a little bit of a set of examples on the API Inspector tool. And let's see if I can find that. Oh, no. The resources that you're going to get, and they're all there where the video is. There is this API Inspector tool, and it's basically just an HTML file, some CSS so that it makes it look a little bit better, a JavaScript file, I use jQuery, and I also include some libraries that will become clear in just a second. So I'm going to just use my Sublime Text, which is my editor of choice, open it in the browser, and you'll see what I've done is in that tool, come back into here in HTML, what I've done is I've actually embedded here the API docset tool so I can have access to that right here in my inspector tool. And really the inspector tool is just this lower half, and I'm just using the top half for the docset just so that I can have quick access to the code. So as I said, the first thing that you have to do is log into the server. So before I do that, the inspector tool in the JavaScript, you have to specify in my global variables here which server you want to connect to. So I'm connecting to my server, and which port, and I've got a secure port. If you don't have a secure port, then you can just use port 80. But you'll be able to connect to the Code-A-Thon server directly if you want to. So once you get your Code-A-Thon accounts, all that information will be in the conference that's online there so that you can get the URLs that you're going to need. And then you can log in even as yourself. But I'm going to log into my own development server here. And what it's going to do once I click on the login button, it's going to, first of all, determine whether or not I'm logged in. And I'm not going to be, because I'm not yet logged in. And it's going to submit that data and run this function here called login, log off. And since I'm not logged in, it's going to take my user ID and password, run it through some libraries to convert it into a base64 SHA-512 encrypted password, and send the request to the server. So it formats this request here. Let me just, oops. Let me see if I can do this. There we go. And it formats the request in this string here. Now I've lost my place. Right here, and sends it to the server using an AJAX call. So the server address, it knows it picked it up from the global variable, and it's going to reply as a JSON. So my server address is going to be the entire thing with the data sent. It sends the data, and it returns a response and formats that response, and it's going to place it in this window here. So you can follow through the code, but let me just go through that process. And I'm going to log in. Oops. Oh, God, wouldn't you know it? Hold on a second here. I think I was playing around beforehand, and I messed up. So bear with me here. Let me just see if I can log in now. There we go. Sorry, I had left the session open, and I hadn't closed the session. So if that ever happens to you where you get a no session, what you just do is you just go to the website, and it clears that session. I could have just cleared my cookies. So sorry about that. So what we see here is I logged in, I submitted, and I got this response back from the server. And this is the JSON-P response, and it sends back information to me that I could present any way that I want. I just have to be able to parse that data. So we can see that I'm applying it to a variable called FC data. So we have a login reply, and we get this information, like this number here that is last logged in. I've got server information. I've got what sets of features that I've got. And these are all just numbers that we need to somehow be able to translate, if you like, and be able to present to our users as HTML. The other thing that the server sends back to you are these verification keys, and you get 10 verification keys when it first comes back from the server. So what I do in this login routine, and I use the same login routine for everything. So when I'm building an application, all I do is I just copy my login routine, and I use it for all of my applications, and you can see that when we get into the videos. But what I do is I store those different verification keys into a global array called VI keys, because any time that I am going to be updating information on the server, I have to also, for security reasons, send one of those V keys to the server so that it knows that it's a legitimate request. So a little bit more on that in just a second. So now that I've got that information, I have to be able to deal with it. And what I really like about Chrome is that Chrome has this excellent console, Chrome Developers Tools. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring up my Chrome Developers Tools here. And because when I retrieve this data, I'm storing it in this variable called FC data. So I have the ability to just type in FC, and even if I start to write, it knows what my global variables are. I can just expand to the right, press enter, and we can actually see that here's the data that I've already got on my server. So I have this object that is called login reply. And in login reply, here's where I've got all of my information, including all of my V keys right down here. So what you have to be able to do within and when you're learning to use the API, is to be able to extract or parse data that is coming back as JSON. And so here's my JSON object. So if I want to be able to use in my code and determine something such as, let me just make sure that I've got it. Let's say if I want to get that particular number here, my daily remaining, or if I want to get access to this last login. Here's this number right here. Well, the object is FC data, and it's in login reply, and it is last login. So if I just type in here FC data, and then dot, you can see that it's bringing up all of the different things within FC data. It's login reply, and it is case sensitive. And then if I go into dot last login, and then hit enter, it's going to retrieve that piece of information for me. So as long as I have this variable, then I will be able to extract any information from my JSON reply and be able to use it. That number, unfortunately, isn't too much use to me because it is the number of seconds, I think, since, what is it, January the 1st or September, I can't even remember, 1904, something like that. So what we've done in the API inspector is also include some libraries. And these are libraries, first-class libraries, of which many of these different functions here will be useful to you. And one of these ones is this firstclass.fcp S8, I guess that stands for soft start time, to JavaScript time, so JavaScript local time. So here is this function, and because Chrome knows about that function, I should be able to discover it through here. So if I just go first class, and then it is a util dot, hold on, let me go back again, sorry. First class dot FCP, first class dot FCP. So first class dot FCP dot SA time to JS local time. I've got my function. And now within that function, I can say, okay, I want FC data dot login reply that last login. Close that off. Hit enter. Oh, it's because I use language. Last login. There we go. All right, so a little bit convoluted here in what I was doing, but basically what I was trying to show is that when you get data back from the API, then you can drill down on that data to get any piece of information that you want, and then use some of the built-in libraries to get it into a presentation mode that is going to be presentable to your users, so I could then just use that in my code. So let me just go do another example. So I'm now logged in. I've got this session information. What if I want to now find out what's, for example, on my desktop? Well, I know that my desktop is a container. And if I take a look at my desktop, here is the code for retrieving a desktop. So I'm just going to copy that code. It's now on my clipboard. And I'm going to come right in here, and I'm just going to paste that information into here. And I'm going to submit that request to the server. When I submit the request, I now get this JSON data back. And so if I clear my console, and if I just type in FC data up here now, and hit enter, this is now all of the data that is on my desktop. And all of the items, MLDS's message list data store, this is all of the items that are on my desktop. And if I keep on drilling down on here, we'll see that this item here is my mailbox. So MLDS item 0 is my mailbox, and there is the web ID for my mailbox. So once I've opened my desktop, and I could actually even see that in my code here, if I just search for mailbox, we can see that this is my first item. It's the same information that I'm showing here is right here, and the web ID is here. So I can select that item, copy it, and then just add it to my path. So my path is right here. Put a slash, and then submit that. And now I'm inside my mailbox. So if I change my FC data here, FC data, now I'm looking at all of the items in my mailbox. So here are going to be all of my messages, and I got 99 messages in there. And one of these is going to be this particular message. So again, there is a web ID for that message, which is here. So I can either select it from here, or I could select it from the left-hand side and continue to drill down on where I am right now. So I'm going to copy that from here, and I'm just going to add that right over here. And drill down and submit that data. So now I'm inside of a message. And so again, if I clear this off and just go FC data and hit enter, now I'm looking at the message object. And one of the things that you're going to see here is that this message object has this particular item called body. So if I just go FC data dot body, I should be getting the body of the message. And there we have it. There's the body of my message, but that looks pretty strange because what that is it's a base 64 encoded message body. Well, we've got libraries, and if I go back to my library here, we have a library object here that allows me to do base 64 decoding, and it's a utility function, or it's simply just straight a base 64 decode function. So what I should be able to do then is go back to my code, which is in my browser, and say, okay, I want to use the base 64 decode function on FC data dot body. And when I do that, I now got HTML that I could present. So let me just back here. Just clear the screen. Just get that here again. Oops. There's my body. I just want to just show you exactly what this looks like. So there is my code, and you can see if you are familiar with HTML, you'll recognize that as HTML. I'm just going to copy that code, and in fact, I'm going to come over and just create a little web page here. So let me just create a new page, and I'll just paste that data into here, and I'm just going to save this page as test.html. And I'm going to open it in our browser. And there you go. There is that message that was in my mailbox. So if I can just take that code and then present it in my application, I can build applications that can get access to anything. So the API inspector hopefully will allow you to drill down and determine different information and be able to get information. So different sort of gets are things. So for example, if I wanted to, under known objects, take a look at session information, I can copy that and paste it into my submit field, and all that information comes back, and you can then learn how to parse that and read those different codes. One more thing that I just want to do is I want to take a look at type folders. Hold on, what I want is known objects, nope, type folders, the pulse. And I want to retrieve the pulse because I want to use this as an example. So I'm going to copy the the syntax. I'm going to paste it into here, and I'm going to submit it. So there's my entire pulse, and so every single one of these is a pulse post. And the data there is base 64 encoded. So if I come back onto my right-hand side here and just go FC data one more time, and take a look at the object, and each one of the objects are in, or each one of the pulse posts are in my message list data store. If I take a look at that very first one here, we can see that we've got our data that is all in here, and this object is the actual pulse post information here, base 64 encoded. So I'm just going to roll back here a little bit. So what I'm looking for now is FC data, MLDS, array item 0, and this 8063 object, the base 64. So FC data dot MLDS, and then I want the 0 item, and because the item that I want is field ID 8063, I can't use dot notation on numbers, so I have to use string notation 8063. Oops. And the base 64 representation, B64, which is the object that was right here, B64. So if I've done that correctly and hit enter, I've got that code. Now that's base 64, so I really then should be able to just go base 64 dot decode and just take this information here, copy, paste it into here, hit enter, and there we have the pulse post coding using API, using the API. So you'll see an example of that in the code, how I actually walk through all of this data, grabbing that information and getting it. So one more example, but it'll be a post, and then we'll move on. But I just thought it was important to sort of show the process that you go through to try and inspect and look at the information that is retrieved through the API. Posts are a little bit different in that posts require, so for example, if I want to post to the pulse and change my pulse, so I'm going to do a pulse post update. I'm going to copy this code here, and if I paste that code into here, you'll see that it's saying that the pulse reply is going to enter some text, and then it's going to require a V key. And if you remember, when we logged in, we captured all of those V keys in an array. So it just so happens in the API inspector, when I have a change event on this field, so that when I tab, it just grabs one of my V keys and replaces that V key variable, if you like, with one of the V keys. So now all I have to do is change my text and put whatever I want as my pulse reply, or my pulse post. Oops. Yeah. Pulse post status update. Right. So what I'm going to put in here is webinar number 2. Webinar number 2, and submit it. Oh. That's bizarre. Oh, I know why. It's because no. Well, that has never happened to me before. Unless I've done something. Hold on a second here. Webinar 2, submit. Yeah, okay. I must have done a typo or something in there. So I've made the submission perfectly this time. It sends me back a replacement V key for the one that I used. And, oh, no, I'm doing something wrong there. You know what? I think I've got the wrong word in my code here. The reason I was confused there is because it says pulse reply, and I think it should say pulse post. So there might be an error in my code. So my apologies there, but all the other ones will work. I'll make sure that gets sorted out and gets fixed. So the API inspector allows you to do all sorts of things here. One of the things that you're going to want to make sure that you do, as I mentioned, is to go through the different videos. And if I go to the video series, which is the FirstClass API video series, so just API videos, you'll see here that I've stepped you through an introduction, as I've done here, logging in and logging out. I walked through the entire tool, so it'll be a little bit more clear than what I've just rambled on about now. How you retrieve and update information with the API inspector. I go through a complete description of JSON, what JSON is and how you can interpret JSON, how I use the developer tool, just as you've seen here, and Firefox has a similar tool. I take you through how you can determine what the different field IDs are that are returned in the JSON data, so that you notice that I had used that field 8063. If you didn't know what that was, I give you some tips on how to determine what those field numbers represent. And then I go through a complete example of building your own example or building your own source example using the API, and then go through a number of different other examples that are available to you. And those other examples can be downloaded directly here. And let me just take you through a couple of those. So code examples, so Code Sampler is one of these ones. So I'm just going to open this in the browser, and you may have seen this before. It's my old API tool, but for example, now if I just go, I think I actually have to, first of all, with my inspector, I think I should have logged out. So let me just make sure that I do that. And Code Sampler Joe Schmo. Log in. There we go. So here is this is exactly what we did before. This now should be familiar. There's the response, and here's how I've just chosen to display that data and present it to the user. So for example, if I wanted to take a look at what the pulse is, there's the command that gets sent to the server, so that should look a little bit familiar now. Here's the information that is returned as the JSON, and here's how I've chosen to represent that data. So all sorts of information can be done. So let me just see if I have the status update now. So if I say updating the pulse and post to the pulse, yeah, that was my problem before. I had used pulse reply, and it should have been pulse post, and now I'm getting a correct response back saying that there's no error. The pulse has been updated, and what I had said was updating the pulse. So if I come back here and take a look at the pulse, and now we can see that that's a response. So that was just an error in my doc set that I just said I'll get that replaced and repaired right away. Excuse me, right away. So there's all sorts of examples that you can then take a look at the code behind this particular application and see how I've actually parsed that data and presented it to you. So one more example here that might be useful for you to see is, here's one where I drill down on the mailbox. So we did look at the mailbox item before in the code, where first of all I logged in. And then what I did manually in the presentation was I actually found out what the web ID for my mailbox was, and then presented the list, and then got the list items of what's in my mailbox. Well, I do that all in code, so we can see here I went in and I grabbed quickly all of my mailbox items. And if I drill down, and so what I've hidden in behind here is the web ID for this particular object. So if I double click on here, it actually now presents that message that we saw directly here in my mailbox or in my window. So I should be able to back up by just removing that last web ID from my URL. I'm not displaying it here because that's not useful to the user to see, but I should be able to drill down and just be able to get access, including subfolders and being able to take a look at information that is inside and so on. So the ability to create applications any way you want and present it in any fashion that you want is available to you through the API itself. So just some little other things before I sort of open it up to some questions here. So we've got all sorts of code examples. I'll log off to make sure that I've logged off this server. We've got the code sampler. There are specific examples that are in that tool set. In the API video set here, you've got access to the API inspector tool, complete source code for the video tutorial for that is in here for building, actually, to take a look at getting your unread mail and presenting unread mail, and then all of the code examples so you can just pull those things apart. Just sort of finish off the presentation, I just wanted to mention that a year ago, I basically had a minimal knowledge of APIs, JSON, web services, HTML, CSS. I really had to teach myself how to do all of this. And the beauty of the internet is that information is all there. And so throughout that process, what I did was I tried to keep track of a lot of the different information that I had found useful. So let me just close this off. Every time they update a browser, I forget how do I close this now? It looks different than it did yesterday. Oh, it's probably because it's being hidden here. Set. There we go. Okay, so on the FirstClass website, if you go to Resources, Tips, Tricks, and Tools, oh, there's one other thing that I just wanted to mention as well to you. And rather than it being in the FirstClass 12 API section, last week when I did the external applications, I don't know if I pointed you to this Resources for Developers. And here are all sorts of resources that you may find useful. I subscribe to a number of tutorial sites. Some of them are free and some of them are minimal cost, but well worth the investment if you want to build your skills. There's a site that's called Stack Overflow that is basically the best place to get your answers on anything. You can subscribe to a number of different Twitter accounts that basically post daily updates to different JavaScript libraries that will be useful to you. App.net is another service I subscribe to. I've got all sorts of links to sites that help me in web design, in CSS, how to use Sublime Text effectively, which is the code editor that I use in web development, websites that link to different things on HTML and understanding JSON and YouTube video stuff, JavaScript libraries and converting CSVs to JSON, all sorts of things. And jQuery is the tool that I use to make manipulation of that data easier for me. So there's a ton of information here on this section of the website, and I really recommend that you review that or make a bookmark link to that particular area, because there are sites that I found really helpful to me in my progress. One last thing that I just wanted to go, if you were in the session last week on the external applications, this external app dev tool, there was a section where we grabbed, when we use the application, the user information. And I just wanted to, hopefully this will make a little bit more sense to you right now, is that when we used that application last week and we stored the user information here in this user variable, what I actually did was I made a call to the API. So as you're working through the API, the function at the bottom of this particular section here, where I get the session information, this function here is essentially exactly the same call where I format a known object is equal to -3, which is my user information data. I'm replying back as JSON. I'm sending it to the server address. I don't have to log in because I'm already logged in with external applications. I'm already logged in. So I can send any API call to the server as long as I know what the server address is and what that syntax is that I can get from that API doc set, and send it to the server. And deal with the return data. In this case here, when I get that data, I simply load the return data. So instead of it being FC data, I put it into a variable called data, and form data 7012 happens to be the user ID. The JSON object data.formdata.706 is the CID, and so on. So that's just parsing that returned JSON data and loading it into a variable, and then I can use that in my code. So having said that, just to finalize by saying that we will be sending out, hopefully by the end of the day, your Code-A-Thon account information, and the Code-A-Thon is essentially officially open. And perhaps now is a good time, Gary, to open up the lines for any QA, and I can watch the if any questions come in on the chat. So Gary, can you unmute people, or?
Okay, yes, everybody should be unmuted now, except one or two of you that muted yourselves, punching numbers in your phone. But go ahead and feel free to unmute your phones, and if you've got any questions, we can take those now.
Or did I successfully lose everybody as I rambled on? The beauty of recording information is that you'll have a chance to go back and stop and repeat and go through it. And hopefully the video series will repeat that as well. Certainly if there's any questions now, I'd be happy to entertain them. Are the API keys available to an FCWS app? Are you talking about an external application? In that case, no. You can only get the keys on login. So the external applications you can't create. You can't. Well, the only way that you'd be able to do that is to do a login with an external app. So you'd have to log in twice. But you can create objects through through the API, but not unless you re-log in if it's an external application.
All right. Any other questions?
Now, if we're not answering your call, then perhaps it would be better to just type in the, if it doesn't sound like we're answering you, it could be that we can't hear you, so you can type in your questions into the chat.
Right. Okay, wonderful. Well, we will have the information on the contest server, which is going to be our central place for question and answer. That information will be sent out within the next couple hours. So if you do have additional questions, that's going to be a great place to post those questions, and we'll have some other details about the contest in that email message. So watch for that. If you don't see it in the next couple hours, let us know. But we should have that up and running, and we really very much appreciate your participation and look forward to the conversation and the apps that are going to be built here. So thank you. Stuart, do you have anything else to add?
No, Gary. Just I wouldn't mind touching base with you after this if you can give me a call or I can give you a call.
Okay, absolutely, absolutely, great. And I'm going to go ahead then and end the recording. We'll get this posted online and add that to our resource set. And thank you all very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.